The LD at School team is very pleased to welcome our guest speaker today, Emily Moorhead, whose presentation this afternoon is entitled Evidence-Based Early Literacy Practices to Support Every Learner. We have a lot of material to cover today, so the entire hour will be dedicated to the presentation, but don't worry if you have questions. We are here to answer them. Submit your questions either through the chat or the question box. You can email it directly to me. You can respond to the email tomorrow with your questions, and I will also be sending out a link to a Google form where you can submit your questions. Once we've collected all the questions that we received, we will have Emily back on June 2nd for a follow-up session. In this follow-up session, she will help apply all the learning that you do today with some case studies and answer all your questions. The Ministry of Education has provided funding for the production of this webinar. Please note that the views expressed in this webinar are the views of the presenter and do not necessarily reflect those of the Ministry of Education, nor the Learning Disabilities Association of Ontario. We will also be tweeting throughout the entire presentation today. If you want to participate in the conversation, you can send us a tweet by using our handle at LD at School right at the bottom of the page there, or using the hashtag LDWebinar. So that takes care of all of our housekeeping for this afternoon. So I'm just going to get started with the presentation. Please join me in welcoming our presenter for the day. Emily Moorhead is a teacher with the Limestone District School Board in Kingston, Ontario. She's been teaching early primary children for 17 years. When her own child showed signs of difficulty in learning to read, she recognized that, like her son, there were consistently children who were leaving kindergarten unprepared for reading success in grade 1. Emily became deeply engaged in her own learning and teaching practices to ensure that every child was given the tools to become a successful reader. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Emily to start the presentation.
Hello, I'm Emily Moorhead. Welcome. We're going to talk today about evidence-based early literacy practices to support every learner in our classrooms. I'm a kindergarten teacher, and so the beginning of the year is always exciting and a new adventure underway because all of these little people come to school and they are excited to learn and they're curious about what they'll be doing, and they get here. This little guy is peeking in my classroom window, getting ready for the new school year to begin. It's important to know that learning to read is a major job of the first few years at school. So we want to make sure that our instruction really helps to support that happening. And we can actually meet kids where they are and help move them along that path towards literacy in those years that we have in kindergarten with our students. Often there's this debate about child-directed play and teacher-directed instruction. And in kindergarten and in our Ontario system where we have a play-based program, this debate sometimes feels like we have to do a lot of play or all play. And in fact, it doesn't have to be one or the other. We can find that nice balance where we can do both, and we can have lots of opportunities for open-ended play where children are making choices and decisions throughout the day. But we can also offer that teacher-directed instruction that really helps to move children forward with their thinking and with their learning. It doesn't have to be one or the other. We can always do both. It's important to understand that while human brains are wired for language, reading is unnatural. It is not something that our brains are wired to do. This means that the connections in our brain formed or created through activities and through experiences that will help reading to happen. It needs to be taught. We can't assume that just because children have been read to, or just because they're in a space that is full of books, that reading will happen on its own. That instruction is a big part of how reading develops. But how do we do it? How do we get there? There are 4 essential components for early literacy instruction. The first is oral language. Second is vocabulary. Phoneme awareness and alphabet knowledge are essential for children to learn how to read. We'll talk about each of these today. We'll begin with oral language. Oral language happens throughout our days at school, and we can be really careful about making sure that we're offering lots of opportunities for children to speak and listen, to engage in conversations during snack time or recess or playtime where they're really conversations about whatever the children are interested in, as well as whole class or small group discussions about topics that we're working on or learning about at school. Before, during, and after read alouds are awesome times to have conversations and dialogue about what's happening in the story. And we can also offer really structured activities that target oral language specifically. We can do activities like see, think, wonder, which one doesn't belong, or would you rather activities where we're offering children an image or some choices, and they have to tell, hopefully using complete sentences, and we can guide that to happen too, what their own ideas and thoughts are. Here's an example of a I see, I think, I wonder activity. We might show this picture to a class and then give children an opportunity to start with just using the sentence stem I see, and they can tell about the picture. I see a turtle. I see a skeleton. I see a shell. Once we've had some dialogue about what they can see in that picture, we can start to move into what they think. So I think this turtle is not alive. So they're starting to use that image from the picture and also what they know about the world around them to help them put those pieces together. And then we move into I wonder. And often that happens quite fluidly from one to the next as kids are saying, I see a turtle and I think it might be dead. So they already are using lots of sentences and lots of words to help them tell about what they're seeing. But we can help to make sure that our children who need more support can use those sentence stems really easily and carefully. This picture is really interesting for little ones because it does feel like we always have been told that turtles carry their shell on their backs, but in fact, very clearly their shell is part of the turtle. So all day long at school, we can be explicit and purposeful in creating moments that engage our children in oral language activities. We can use our whole group and small group learning times to incorporate oral language skills that benefit everyone. We share new experiences all the time with little ones at school, and this allows us to provide new vocabulary and to help children develop their background knowledge about topics that they may not know already. In this picture, we're looking at one of the teachers from our school who had tapped the maple tree right outside our yard. So we were seeing what was happening and those pails were being added to the tree. And the children say, that is a maple tree. Maple syrup will drip out of the tree. And then someone else said, no, not maple syrup, just sap. And so then when I was able to interject, I could give extra vocabulary. So I said, that's right, inside the tree, sap is moving to carry nutrients throughout the tree. When we tap the tree, we get some of the sap to come out into the pail. We will boil it for a long time to evaporate most of the water away. What we have left is sticky and sweet. Do you know what it is? You can see that I used lots of vocabulary that helped build children's knowledge and understanding of that experience. To know who our low language learners may be. Some of these prompts will give us thoughts about who they could be. They may not all be the ones that really need us to help them, but often our low language learners may be quiet or shy, but not always. They may be those who repeat the answers of other students instead of thinking of their own ideas. They may be children who are learning English as another language. They may be those who don't follow instructions or routines easily. They seem a little bit out to lunch when we're instructing everyone to come over and join in. They may wait and see what the other children are doing before they start to engage. They may offer responses that are unusual or repetitive or quite limited. I had a student once who used to just say, I love you so much. I love you every time, no matter what the question was. And it was that she did not have the language skills to be able to express other thoughts and ideas in a way that was helpful or useful for her at school. They often are children who respond, I don't know, quite frequently. And those children, if we know about them and we're aware of them, we can make sure that we're able to support them by providing lots of opportunities for these children to speak and to listen with us so that we can be a strong model for their language skills. These kiddos may fly under the radar, so it's really important to notice them and then really protect that time to have some moments with them. It's important to remember that those really high language students or the louder voices may overshadow these kiddos. So we need to make sure that we're giving these little ones some time, maybe even out in the hall or when we sit next to them at snack time, so that they have that protected time and space for them to say their own thoughts and ideas. We always let those children direct the topic of conversation when we're working on their oral language, but we don't wait for them to initiate that conversation because they may not do that. Next topic is vocabulary, and we've talked about it a little already because they're quite tied together. When we're thinking about vocabulary instruction, we can be quite explicit with our vocabulary instruction, and it kind of happens in two ways. The first is this incidental on purpose vocabulary learning. So similar to the maple sap and maple syrup discussion, these words come up incidentally when we're doing something, when we're having an activity, or when a child brings up something interesting. And in our language enriched classrooms, we can offer lots of opportunities for children to practice these words and to understand what the words mean. We can also choose read alouds that help to support that oral language and vocabulary development. The other piece is explicit vocabulary teaching. So when we read books, we actually can choose words ahead of time that we know that are going to be important words for children to know and learn and understand. And we can select those words ahead so that we can really highlight them when we're reading. That specific word instruction will really help children build those skills with lots of practice to be using those vocabulary words frequently at school. When we're choosing words to teach, one of the things we can think about are these Goldilocks words. So Goldilocks words are not too difficult and not too easy. They're just right words. So we don't necessarily need children to know really complex and challenging words. And we don't want to choose words that are so simple that most children would already know them. We want to choose those words that are right in the middle, where most of our children don't have a perfectly clear understanding of what that word is, but they do know concepts that are related to that word, so that will help them to understand the word more clearly, and it gives them that new vocabulary word to add into what they already know. Another way to think about vocabulary words are in these tiers. So tier 1 words are the very common and basic words that are used in everyday conversation, and most children already know them. It's important to remember that sometimes there are children, for instance, children who are learning English as a new language, or children who have had more of an impoverished background in oral language and vocabulary development from home, that may not know some of those common words. And certainly if children seem to not know them, it's important to introduce them as well. But words like food and between and walk, most children have heard many times and are quite comfortable with. Let's hop for a moment right up to the top tier of the cake and look at those tier 3 words that are highly specialized. They're specific to a very specific domain. So often they're words that have to do with a topic in science or a topic in social studies. And we want to work on those words as well, but they're not words that we need to spend a great deal of time on in our regular instruction. They're quite narrow and quite specific to their own role in language, and they may not have lots of utility for children to be able to use them in different ways. Where the little star is are tier 2 words, and those words are more sophisticated than the words children will typically use in their own common speech with others. They're found across a variety of texts and domains. And when we can focus on them, it really helps children to understand those texts that we're reading at the moment, and also to extend their understanding of those words when we see them again. Here's one of the things that I often will do. These are books from my classroom, and when I'm choosing to teach words in text, I often will have a sticky note already tucked inside the book that has some of the vocabulary that I have picked out from that book, so that I know ahead of time, and I know as I'm pulling that book out to read to students, that I've already selected some words that are going to be useful. So in the example of Milo Imagines the World, I chose the word awaiting, I chose the word soothing, I chose cluttered, and I chose separate as words that I might want to talk about in that book. Similarly, the Bagel King has some words, and that one has the word tuchus tucked in, which I didn't know that children would likely know, and so I thought it was important to tuck it in there, and bagel just in case. Before we start to read a book, we can use vocabulary prediction to help children start to think about the words that might be in that story. So one thing we can say is, will we find the word moon in this book, do you think? Will we find pineapple in this story? Will we find sled? We're giving children opportunities to think about those words that might be in that book. And if we're looking at snowmen at night, it's an opportunity for us to pick some words that will quite likely be in that book and some that might not be. Later in the year, we actually don't even need to offer the choices anymore, and we can start to ask children what words they might think would be in the book, and they'll be able to make predictions as we worked on this a little more. While we're reading the story, we'll use those sticky notes that we pulled ahead of time, and we'll have already selected 3 or 4 is typically about right for kindergarten, tier 2 words or just right words that are great vocabulary words that will help children not only understand that vocabulary in context in the story right now, but also will be useful words for them to be able to use other times. You can look up and just Google kid-friendly definitions to help you find a way to define that word that is useful for children, that does not sound just like a dictionary definition. It'll give you a nice way to link to other ideas that children will already know, so that they're not feeling like you're just reciting something from a dictionary for them. When you come to the word in the text, you'll briefly explain the word in context by giving that kid-friendly definition and having a little discussion about it. The word handkerchief in this book is a perfect example, because not a lot of children know about handkerchiefs anymore. And so it pops up regularly, and it in the story was really interesting because the kids didn't actually know what that word was. So it's not a particularly high utility word, but it is one they needed to know and understand. And so it just tucked it in, and then they start to know that word. And when it comes up in other stories, we recognize it again. Then after reading is when the real explicit instruction with vocabulary really begins to happen. So we'll talk about that word again from the context of the story. So remember, in the book, Amos was walking to the bus. He ambled to the bus. He moved along quite slowly. He wasn't in a rush because he had lots of time. So it gives children understanding of that word in context. And then we've also reviewed the meaning of it again. Then we can provide examples and non-examples to help children really understand. So I was really late for work. I ambled to work. Does that make sense? No, it doesn't make sense. I went for a lovely walk in the forest. I was ambling through the forest. Does that one make sense? Yes, it does. We might even try to associate an action of some kind, like let's pretend we're ambling down the road when we're heading to the bus, and we'll give children a chance to practice so that they really start to use that same vocabulary word that we've heard in the story and use it in different ways as well. So here in the example, I have the word cluttered. We're thinking about that word. Children may not know that word already. So the definition that I've given them is that it's filled with a messy collection. So then as I'm moving into the second side of this slide, we'll talk about those connections. So I'm going to say some things that might be an example of the word cluttered. I'll give children a chance to say that word. If you think what I'm saying is an example of cluttered, give a thumbs up. I might often, quite often, we will say, if you think it's an example of cluttered, say the word cluttered. And then I'll say something like, the shed was full of tools. It was cluttered. The teenager had books and clothes all over her room. What do you think? Cluttered. Great. What about the librarian kept things as neat and tidy as a pin? Not cluttered. Good. Next big one is phonological and phonemic awareness. As we move through learning how to read, it's really important that children actually shift their awareness from the meaning of words to the sounds in language. So instead of, often at the beginning of the year, it often crops up that I'll say, okay, listen so carefully, and we're going to listen for the beginning sound in the word sun. You can hear that I've stretched it out so that they can hear that sound really nicely. And some little soul will put up their hand and they will say, and I'll say, oh, what sound do you hear at the beginning of sun? And they'll say hot. They're still thinking about the meaning of words. Children often, when they start kindergarten, have never been asked to think about the sounds in words before. And it's a big job to learn how to do it. So it's important that we get working on that. Phonemic awareness tasks can be done in the dark or with your eyes closed. And as we go through these, you'll notice that they're getting sequentially more difficult. So I might say, tell me the first sound you hear in the word baby. What is the last sound you hear in the word wish? So those ones already are working on those beginning and ending sounds. You notice, I'll just go back to that last slide for a moment to remind you that when we started with the word sun, it was possible for me to stretch that sound out for a long time to help children tune into it. So listen, sun. As they get better at this, I won't need to stretch that out anymore. But when we go to the word baby, that B sound is a stop sound, and it happens so quickly that if you didn't hear it, it's already finished. So it's hard to stretch that one out. So it's important to note that even that word is a more difficult word than the sun word that we used before. When we move on to that ending sound, that can be a big leap for a lot of kids. I often will have them put their hand on their shoulder and slide down their arm as they say the word. So they'll say the word wish. and catch that last sound right in their hand. That will help them remember that they're going for that ending sound and not trying to tell us the beginning sound. Once they are able to do beginning sounds, that one becomes really easy for them and we can move on to ending sounds. That's much harder for many, many children. Okay, we can move on a little more. Say the word bus, but don't say the b. Bus. Say the word dog, but change the d to a h. Sound is in the middle of map. So that's getting much harder when we're moving into those middle sounds and when we're moving into those substitutions, they're harder for children. So we need to give them time to work and practice with those. When you think about the word map, it can be helpful to put the word on your arm. We often will do whole bodies in kindergarten at the beginning of the year. So we might say, ah, map. And then I'll say, what sound was on your belly button? That will help them zero in on that middle sound. And for a while, we'll work on that with whole body touching so that we can really hear it. And we can hear that ah sound in the middle. It's hard. And then finally, we might get to a point where we can say, tell me all the sounds in the word run. So like I did with whole body for map, I might do that as a demonstration. And by the time we're asking children to tell us all the sounds and words, they might say, run. They might just put it right onto the fingers, run. Similarly, we want kids to also be working on blending. So I might say, put these sounds together and tell me the whole word. Oh, what's that word? Pal. Phonemic awareness tasks can be done in the dark or with eyes closed, but connecting them to print is stronger. They're very, very powerful when we also attach them to print. So when we're teaching children the alphabetic code or the symbols that represent our letters and our sounds when we're speaking and when we're writing, we can actually create opportunities for using letters and sounds that children already know to amp up that phonemic awareness work. So if they know those letters, they can actually use the letters to really help support that. It's really noteworthy that when children are working on making those sounds on their fingers or sounds in their mind and then switching them, children who already know the letters and who already would be able to spell that word have a much easier time making those substitutions. So changing the word log and changing the to a to make it say hog, they're actually much, much faster because they can imagine the letters switching and then they don't have to try to remember so much. If phoneme awareness goals are targeted in kindergarten, the goals can be attained with fun and engaging activities and in turn will benefit learning to read by all students. If we leave these tasks and skip over them altogether, they will haunt children for a long time. They actually need to be worked on and practiced a bit. And once we've mastered them, we can't lose them. So they are a finite skill. So it's important to just get right to it and make it fun and playful with our little ones at the beginning when it's really just fun. And then they will have those skills for life. The last big unit is that alphabet knowledge, and it's the one we often talk about when we think about kindergartners at school. We're learning the letters, we're learning the letter names, the way the symbol looks, and we're learning the sounds that the symbols represent so that they will all be tied together. And these ties are super important for being able to sound out words when we read and also to be able to spell words. So if you look there, direct instruction of the sounds and symbols is the most effective method of instruction. So in these pictures, sometimes it's small group work and sometimes it's whole group, sometimes it's outside, and we even worked outside on our phonics and our phonemic awareness work all through the winter outside. This was during COVID, so it was great because I actually could pull my mask down to show children what my mouth was doing when they needed to see that. But we often do it outside even now that we don't have to be quite so tucked into our masks all the time. Adding direct instruction in phonics means we're moving beyond that oral phonemic awareness to also connect to print. We're teaching the sound and symbol relationships in isolation first so that children have seen them and practiced them and can then begin to use them in all the context times that they would be using them when they're reading or when they're writing on their own. We're providing instruction and practice with blending sounds together. So that's 2 sounds or 3 sounds or more. And we actually need children to be able to use continuous blending, say the first sound and then say the second sound and say them so they smooth together and keep on going through the word. And we give them lots of opportunity to segment or snap apart those sounds and spell them using the known code. So what they've already been taught, and that code is the alphabetic code, the letters and the sounds. We need to give children the message that English is complex, but it's not crazy. Once we know those rules and patterns, we actually can apply them quite effectively to be quite strong readers and spellers. I like to tell children we're going to learn a secret code. Really gets them excited and interested and ready to learn. I begin with initial screening of all of my students to see what they already know and to notice if there are any glaring red flags that might help me recognize this child who is likely to struggle. I gather and prepare the materials I'll need for instruction, and I create daily routines for this learning in my activity and in my planning so that I make sure that I have some set aside time that will really ensure that we get to use this work every day. So my basic essential screening at the beginning of the year is I check what alphabet knowledge children already have. So I'll just use a very simple chart like that, and I'll just stick one little check mark for the letter name if they know it, and one little check mark for the sound if they know the sound as well. And I'll just go through them just like that. And I'll do one at a time. Often I'll fold that paper in half so that we just do uppercase one day and just do lowercase another day if it feels like it's a lot for children. And if they know all of them, sometimes I'll just jot on the bottom corner, what would happen if you saw C and H together? What would happen if you saw T and H together? So I sometimes will give kids opportunities to show me a little more if in fact they already know all of those sounds. Other times they might take one look and say, I don't know any of those. And sometimes then I will choose a few that they might know, the first letter in their name. Often they know O, often they know S. So I sometimes will ask them those, but if they don't know those ones, or one child once said, I don't even know any numbers yet. And I thought, oh, okay, right, that's a good place to start. And so it's useful to have that kind of information before we get going, because if we know we're teaching to a group of children who don't know any letters, that's very different on our instruction pace and how quickly we teach like how many letters we teach each day or over the course of a week, or how much time children need to practice them will be very different from children who already know most of the letters. We can change our pacing for those children. The next one I always will check is phonemic awareness and phonological awareness. So I will use a screener of some kind. Our board has a screener that we can use. David Cook's past is fine to use as well. So there are screeners that we can use that are already out there. So if you just Google, you'll find lots of opportunities to choose one you like and then have a go with that. And it just gives us a sense of, can they hear beginning sounds? Can they hear ending sounds? Can they hear rhyming? Those things will help us to plan our instruction a bit as well. Finally, I send a note home at the beginning of the year that says, tell me all about Emily. And it gives parents a chance to tell me, or families a chance to tell me some things about their own child. So always on there, it's, the things that their child is particularly interested in. If they're upset, what things work to help calm them down. But then I also will ask, does anyone in your family have difficulty learning to read? It's an easy question to ask. And it really helps me know if there's any kind of family history of any kind of reading difficulty, I'm going to know about it. And that helps me plan my instruction with those children too, because I can keep a closer watch on them to make sure that they're not lagging or falling behind. I also ask if there's any history of speech and language difficulties before children entered school. So sometimes I know right away because their articulation is difficult to understand, but sometimes we don't know what's happened earlier in children's lives before they start school. And it is helpful to ask those questions so that we can support those kids. Children who have had difficulty with speech and language before they've entered kindergarten are also at a higher risk for reading difficulty. Basic knowledge for teachers in kindergarten before you begin. You'll want to know about the letters and the sounds. It'll be important to really think about the way you're pronouncing those phonemes, because the phonemes are sounds, speech sounds. And so when we say those sounds, we want to be really careful about snipping off any little vowel sound that might be attached onto the end. So instead of saying the sound of the letter T, like T, we actually want to snip that sound right off and just say T. We're careful about that so that our children will be able to say those sounds really cleanly, and that will help them with their blending as they move on. So the letter T, of course, is a consonant sound. When we have two consonants stuck together like that, sometimes three, it's called a digraph or a trigraph. So they're working together to make just one sound. We can also have vowel teams that do that, where two vowels are sitting together, two letters are sitting together to make a vowel sound. And so those are important to know. That EA can actually make 3 sounds in English, so that's also important to know. So when we're working away, we want to make sure that we know enough about the letters that we're teaching so that we can be really consistent with what we're telling our kids about them. We want to teach those short vowels we want to teach those short vowels before we get into more complex vowel patterns, because they are tricky to learn and they're really important for reading at the beginning. When I teach short vowels, I teach one and then I teach several consonants and then I teach another one so that I'm not crowding them all together at the beginning. And I also make sure that I do these little chants with my short vowels so that children will really be able to remember and tune in on them. The words I've chosen are carefully chosen because they have that nice, clean, short vowel sound at the beginning that can be snipped from the rest of the word. So we use finger tapping and an action to help us say those ones. So I'll show you. With the letter A, we will say apple, apple, so we're biting an apple. I'll do the letter I next. We'll do itchy, itchy, Next, I'll do O, Oscar, Oscar, and that one is just like an octopus swimming through the sea. And udder, Finally, I left E for last on purpose because it's the hardest one for children to hear. Echo, echo, Once we've taught these short vowels, we want to review them frequently because they are slippery, especially once we start to learn long vowel teams and long vowel sounds, because those long vowel patterns make the vowel say its name. Children are much more likely and easily grasping onto those, and these little short vowels slip away. So it's important to keep reviewing them to make sure they don't get forgotten. When I'm teaching any letter, I want to teach the way the letter looks. Is it tall? Is it short? Does it hang down? Is it straight or curvy? I want to teach children the sound of the letter or the letter team, including the proper way to pronounce that sound. I want to ensure that I've taught them the correct way to print the letter, starting at the top. This is also how we would say how we spell that letter. When we're drawing that symbol or we're printing that letter, that's how we're going to spell that sound. I want to teach them to use blending, so putting that sound first on its own, but then not long after start to use it with other letters too, so we can start to work on that skill because it is hard. And we're going to use only at the beginning those words, those letters that we've already taught, so the children are able to blend all the way across that little word to read words and then short phrases and sentences as well. Finally, we want them to be able to do some segmenting with that letter. So we want to be able to hear it in isolation. And then we also want to be able to use it for spelling words and short phrases and sentences. In what order should we teach the code? It doesn't matter too much. Single letters first seems like an obvious choice. Spread out those short vowels. It's important to remember when we're thinking about phonemic awareness, children can hear beginning sounds first. After beginning sounds, they start to be able to tune in on that ending sound in words. And that middle sound is the hardest. Remember when we were working our way down that list. So it's important to note that for many little words, that vowel is hard for them to hear and tune into. So it's going to be important that we give them the skills they need so that they can hear that sound. Spread them out. We want to use more common letters before we teach less common letters. Some letters show up a lot in lots of words and lots of words that little ones will need to be able to read. And so we want to teach those ones first so that they can get lots of practice with them and they already know them when they try to read words. We don't see the letter Y as a consonant saying that you sound like yellow and yogurt very frequently, so it's not as essential to teach that one early on. We might want to consider ease of printing when we're teaching young children because they're still developing their fine motor control and pencil control. We want to make sure that we're thinking about that ahead of time as well, because certainly when we're thinking about some letters and how difficult they are to print, the curvy ones, the curly ones that turn corners, the ones with diagonals, those ones are harder for children to print. So it's sometimes useful to start with more letters that are vertical lines first, because children will be successful even if they haven't yet developed a great pencil grasp. We also want to consider ease of pronunciation. So how easy is it for us to say those sounds? Some sounds don't develop as early, like the R sound. So we want to be able to leave those ones a little longer so we can get kids' articulation up and running nicely. And then we start to include some of those more difficult to pronounce sounds. Once you've taught those 26 letters, you can keep right on going. You can do digraphs, you can move into vowel teams, you can move into longer words so that children are then having to blend 4 sounds together instead of 3. That makes it a little more difficult when we're still working on those same letter sounds that we've already taught. It can be helpful to choose a scope and sequence and work your way through it. That way, you know you're not skipping over things that are important to learn. And if you find a scope and sequence that matches to some kind of decodable books, the books will often match that sequence so that you can use them quite early to help children practice. A scope and sequence is really talking about how much you plan to teach and the order that you plan to teach it in. Start blending sounds when we've only taught a few letters. Blending is really hard for a lot of kids, and it's important to give them lots of opportunities to practice when the amount of code they know is not so much that they also have to pull a lot of thoughts from that. So I typically will start teaching 2-sound blending when children know about 5 letters. Here we go. We're going to talk now about that strong part about putting those sounds together. So we're using print and those phonemic awareness activities at the same time to really strengthen our instruction. So I use cards that help us to have those sounds already written on them. My cards are color coded, so my consonants are white and my vowels are yellow, so I can help children to see which one is which. I will teach really early that every word has at least 1 vowel in it. So if they have built a word and it doesn't have a yellow card in it, they will know right away that they've missed something. So then I'll have children say those sounds, t, a, p, and then blend them together. T, a, tap, tap. Similarly, in this other photo, I have a little one who's working on 4 sounds, so it's getting a little bit trickier for her. I set up the tiles ahead of time, and all of the words we were working on were going to be words that had blends at the beginning. So it has 2 green tiles at the beginning. The yellow, just like in my code cards, represents that vowel, and the red tile represents the last sound in the word. So she knew that that was how it was set up. And when I gave her the word swim, she touched each tile first, and then she was able to print the letters. But doing both, touching tiles and then printing letters, is very, very powerful. What does all of this look like in a classroom? Read alouds are happening, shared reading is happening. We might use big books, or we might have a message on a chart that we're going to read together. Guided instructional groups that are focused more on teaching that code are often happening daily. We'll talk about that in a moment. Writing is happening really regularly. Spelling work is happening. We're singing. There's all kinds of inquiry happening and all kinds of play throughout our day. This is just one piece of a language program, this working on this phonemic awareness and alphabet knowledge, or working on phonics and phonemic awareness together. We're not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. All the wonderful parts of a literacy and instruction program continue to happen. We just make sure that we're being very explicit and careful about this piece. Now we have a sample lesson to show you. It's in 4 little pieces. So the 4 parts of my lesson, review the sounds first. So you'll see that happen. Let's take a little look. Uh-oh.
All right, boys and girls, eyes up. What sound does this one say? Make sure your tongue really sticks out for that one. Oscar, Oscar, great job. Itchy, itchy, it. Clean, good. Utter, utter, Great. Owl, Dylan, eyes. Good. Where does your tongue go? Behind those teeth. Tuck it in.
Okay, after we've reviewed the sounds we know, that doesn't necessarily need to be all the sounds we know. Once we've got a big fat pack of cards, we don't necessarily need to do all of them. At the beginning, we will do every single one. And sometimes with certain groups, you might want to continue doing every single one. Other times, you can start to leave out the ones that are very old and very familiar. try to keep in those short vowels and anything you've taught quite recently, because we want to help consolidate those ones. Once we've done that review of the sounds, we'll move on to spelling the sounds. So now children will pull out a whiteboard, you'll see, and I will dictate the sounds so that they can print them.
And our new unit? Oh, great job. Pull out your chalk and your chalkboard, please. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Write down. Write down. Colin, good for you. You're paying close attention. Me too. Good. Whoops. Write down. Write down Oscar, Oscar, ah. Write down udder, Good. Write down
Go. Once we've reviewed those sounds, we're going to start to work on blending the sounds together. In this video, you'll see me working with a little Ferris wheel that I've created. It's got letters on it, and the letters move around the Ferris wheel so that we can blend together. It makes some real words and some non-words.
Careful on this one. That's a magic C at the beginning, so it's going to be
So at the beginning, we'll just do 2 sounds together. So we'll maybe just have that J might move around and just line up beside each vowel. And then later, as we get going and children are able to blend 3 sounds, then we would move into that 3 sound blending. So that's a bit later in the year. Finally, we segment sounds to spell real words, and we'll watch that little one because it's quite interesting to see.
Let's get our boards cleared so we're ready to do on your marks spelling. Get ready?
Yeah.
I want us to write down the word fin. I can hear 3 sounds in. Careful. What's going to go on that first line? Good. Lily, good for you.
I did fin.
Careful, not fin. Fin. Got it? Good job. How did you spell fin? Georgia? Awesome. Make sure you got T-H-I-N. Good for you. Now, gosh, I wonder if you could change just one letter or one sound and make it say, I wonder if you could change just one letter or one sound and make it say fin, like a fish has a fin.
Or fin like a bean from
Fin,
last
careful.
year. So we don't have to.
Which one do you need to wipe off to change it? The T and
Nine.
H, because they stick together.
9.
And then make it say
No, you have to look at this. Right down at
It's just fin. That's fin. Now change it and make it say fin, no tongue. Fin.
What's the word now?
Do we need that H anymore, Noah?
Fin.
No. T and H stick together. Good job. Boys and girls, wipe off your board.
we go. Finally, oh goodness, I didn't mean to do that. There we go. Finally, I will teach a new sound or a new pattern or a new concept or skill, and then provide practice with that little piece as well. We'll apply the new piece to everything we already know. You can see throughout that lesson, I'm focusing on articulation. This is clearly before COVID, focusing on articulation and showing what my mouth is doing really frequently so that children are able to tune in. That difficulty between the TH and the F is really hard for lots of kids. And you could really notice that one little fellow who was really finding that challenging. So it's important to think about that and notice those kids as we're going so that we can decide if children have really mastered a skill before we move on to something new. As children are able to blend sounds together to read little words, that's decoding. Decodable texts offer a great opportunity for practice. So the text on the left, for me it's left, about the dog with hat. The dog got a hat. It was a tin pot. Almost every word in that can be decoded just by using the letter sounds we've taught so far. Look over on the other side and see Mrs. Beaver got up early. There are lots of pieces of code in that text that have likely not been taught yet. And it's very, very complicated. It really requires children to guess from the picture to help them understand what the words are going to be. We don't want children's eyes to have to come off the words when they're learning how to read. Those words are the words that they need to read, so we want them to stick there. And here are some examples now, because we've done lots of work and lots of practice with encoding, so spelling, using the letters we know to spell words. We have lots of ways that children are then able to use that spelling in their own activities throughout the day. These children are working on making a chart about different kinds of gems and minerals. And this person working on some spelling with 4 sounds, and this other little fellow that wrote Hulk was eating a lollipop, and he had been taught all already, so he used all to help him get that all in Hulk. So clearly not perfect spelling yet, but moving in the right direction and using lots of complex patterns that had been taught already. It's important to know who your learners are. Some children will come into kindergarten ready to go, and others will not yet be close to learning to read. Some may still be learning how to speak. It's important to honor every learner when they come in the door and teach them where they are. So don't assume that just because they're in kindergarten, they're ready to start learning letters right away. Sometimes we've got to work on some oral language and vocabulary work first, and just let their ears tune in with that phonemic and phonological awareness activity that happens throughout our day at school. After we've completed those initial assessments, we'll have a good understanding of what the students in front of us already know and how we can plan our instruction to meet their needs. This is not and has never been about forcing children to learn to read early. It's about observing children's readiness and providing them with the knowledge and skills needed to help wire up that reading brain. When you're trying to think about this instruction, you might be wondering about whole group instruction or small group instruction or how that works. The key most of all is daily practice. So we want to make sure that we're choosing our instruction to make sure that that can happen for the most children possible. Often for me, it means doing at least part of that lesson as a whole group. I know if I've taught everybody a whole group lesson that has some word games or some phonemic awareness activities, review the known code that we've already learned and might include a new piece of code. I know everybody's had some practice then. Then in my small groups, I can really target skills that are lacking for certain kids or just move things along nicely. And then I can really help with the print and help with some of the activities. I can also use those small groups for my intervention times when children are struggling, or for extension work when children are well beyond what the other children are working on. A balance of both often is the best idea for when we're working on this learning. What materials do you need? I use a set of code cards. So they're just cardstock cards cut into little square rectangle shaped cards. And I used to make them just with index cards. And then I've moved into using the computer just so that I can print a full class set at once. You can do either. Then you may want to just use them for the teacher, and that is perfectly reasonable. Or you may start to want to use them for small groups. So each little group has its own, or even to send them home so that children have them to use at home for practice at home as well. Keeping them in a small Ziploc bag or a color-coded binder clip is a great way to keep them organized. Other materials that are really useful for this work are chalkboards and whiteboards. magnetic letters, so we can move those around. We can do them on a magnetic whiteboard or a magnetic surface, but we can also just use them on the table. A sky grass ground strip for printing. I just made my own. They're not fancy, but they give me a nice anchor to help children know which letters are tall that start in the sky, which ones are shorter and start in the grass, and which ones scoop down into the dirt. It helps children understand how those letters fit on the lines. I use those poppets and fidgets a lot just for working on that phonemic awareness. So when we're doing 2 sound words, I might say, pop this poppet to show me the sounds that you hear in the word up, up. Tell me all the sounds. Those other little peapods are the same kind of idea. We use fly swatters and clean brand new toilet brushes to whack sounds when we're working on discriminating different sounds from each other. Keeping our instructions short and playful is really important. We don't want it to be boring. We don't want it to be dry. We want it to be fun. We want the children to be engaged and happy to do it. Often in our class, I will start with a small group instruction and other children will pull their chairs up to the table. And I'll say, oh, it's not your turn right now. And they'll say, I just want to watch. So I know that I'm keeping that instruction fun enough that if kids are coming to choose it at playtime, it's really, really enticing for them. I'm also really systematic. I make sure that I'm following that scope and sequence carefully so that I'm ensuring that I'm not missing anything and I'm not leaving gaps in children's knowledge. We want to create routines that make this time really powerful and really enjoyable. Every day, work on that phonemic awareness, play with sounds in speech, beginning sounds, ending sounds, middle sounds, blending, segmenting, and manipulating. We want to connect those sounds, those phonemes to symbols or graphemes, print as soon as we can. We want to systematically introduce and teach letters and the sounds that they represent. And we want to guide children's practice in reading, decoding, and spelling, encoding, incorporating those letters that they've already been taught. In addition to our guided groups and our whole class lesson, we also have the materials available regularly for children to just play, and often they will choose to play code group time. So that happens really frequently at school too. Once they start to know their routine and know the activities, they will happily play them all the time. Children often will say, I get to be Mrs. Moorhead this time. What about kids who are not keeping up? It's important to know that children who are not keeping up are not likely to catch up on their own. Those children need some intervention. So it's important to notice them right away and get on that. Really start to pull them aside. And it's nice to be able to say, I know what to do. I know how to help. And I can see that this seems a little hard for you. Sometimes these are kids who always go to the bathroom when it's code time, or they're kids who are watching their neighbors to know what to write down, or they're not saying the sounds out loud, or they're completely lost in the clouds when it's time to do this work. So it's important to know that those kids are going to need a little extra bump to get going and may need a great deal of support. For some children, they need to only hear something 1 or 2 times and they've got it. For other children, it could be 10, 50, hundreds of repetitions and practice before they really have that same level of mastery. When we recognize our struggles early and we intervene quickly, we can keep that gap quite small in kindergarten, and we can help create a really positive outcome for these learners. Couple of things. Number one, this is not a special education problem. So when we're thinking about children who are struggling, they often will need some extra supports from schools. But if we can keep our tier 1 instruction, our whole class instruction, and our classroom-based instruction really strong and really make sure that we're teaching these skills well, we can keep a lot of children from needing lots of extra supports later on. Use that initial screening to help you know who your struggly students might be, and then monitor their progress closely. If you notice that they're slipping or they're not keeping up, give them a little extra boost. Recognize who they are, and also provide those timely and effective interventions. So an extra little bit of time with me every single day can often be all that child needs to keep them keeping up with the rest of the group. Generally speaking, my end goals for the end of kindergarten are that children would know all the letters in the alphabet, that's short vowel sounds, and 1 sound for each letter. I also want them to know a few common digraphs. CH, SH, TH, WH are great ones. I often will teach CK as well. It's a really useful one. And TCH if I'm teaching CH. I want them to be able to blend 3 sounds to read little CVC words quite competently. I don't want them to have to stumble along through them. I want them to be able to blend them fairly easily. And I want them to be able to do the same with spelling. So to be able to segment 3 sounds to spell little CVCs quite accurately. So I don't want there to be a lot of little errors. I want them to know those letters well enough that they can use them quite competently. There's a lot to learn. English is quite a complex language, and it's important that we keep moving forward so that we're making sure we're giving kids a good, strong, solid foundation. We want to ensure that our children who are having the most difficult time are getting the extra support they need early on. Time is not on their side. There's so much to learn, and they may need so much repetition that we want to make sure we're keeping going with that learning for them. We work hard on those foundational skills for reading, oral language, vocabulary, phonemic awareness, and knowledge of the alphabetic code, knowledge of the letters. We can make sure our kids are getting the very best possible start in school. Educators need to plan for that daily explicit teaching to make sure that every child has the opportunity to develop these essential skills. Waiting for children to stumble on these skills on their own is leaving some children to fall behind or fail. We will never have kids who randomly wonder what T and H might do if they were beside each other. We have to give them that knowledge so that they can use those letters effectively. Our young learners come to school with a wide range of experiences and abilities. They've had different adventures long before they came to school. Some families speak more than one language. Some have traveled a lot. Some have lots of books in their home or visit libraries frequently, and others have not. It's our job to build readers. Families are counting on us. We need to do that work, and we need to really use what research tells us about how reading happens to support our beginning readers. By changing our classroom instruction, we can keep kids from failing, and we can reserve those extra additional supports for children with more complex learning needs. That's the end. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much, Emily, for that informative and engaging presentation. As I mentioned earlier, because there was so much material to cover, we don't have time to take any of your questions today, but I did receive some in the chat box. We'll be saving those for Emily for when she comes back on June 2nd. Also, if you think of any questions after the fact, once you're sitting at home tonight, if anything pops into your mind, you can reach us in lots of different ways. One of the best ways is to email info@ld@school.ca or check out our Twitter and see all the tweets we put out today with the hashtag #LDwebinar. I will also be providing a link to submit your questions in tomorrow's follow-up email, so keep an eye on your inbox for that. That follow-up email will also include a link to a survey and a copy of the slides. The fourth thing that will be included in that email will be a link to register for the follow-up session for this webinar, which will be taking place on June 2nd. So just follow that link in your email if you aren't already registered. On behalf of the LD at School team, I'd like to thank Emily once again for her wonderful presentation and thank our audience for taking the time out of their day to join us. Please remember that there will be a follow-up email and you can respond to that email if you've got any additional questions for me or anyone on the team or Emily herself. With that, that comes to the end of our presentation. I just want to thank you one last time, and I hope you all enjoy the rest of your day. See you next time.